All right, guys. So we're back. This is chapter 10 of Because of Winn-Dixie. Where we left off was Opal had just met Gloria Dump, the witch, in that crazy house with the long garden, and she was just about to tell Gloria Dump everything about herself. Chapter 10. I told Gloria Dump everything. I told her how me and the preacher had just moved to Naomi, and how I had to leave all my friends behind. I told her about my mama leaving, and I listed the 10 things I knew about her. And I explained that here in Naomi, I missed mama more than I ever had in Watley. I told her about the preacher being like a turtle, hiding all the time inside a shell. I told her about finding Winn-Dixie in the produce department, and how because of him, I became friends with Miss Franny Block, and got a job working for a man named Otis at Gertrude's Pets, and got invited to Sweetie Pie Thomas's birthday party. I even told Gloria Dump how Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry called her a witch. But I told her that they were stupid, mean, bald-headed boys, and I didn't believe them. Well, not for long, anyhow. And the whole time I was talking, Gloria Dump was listening. She was nodding her head and smiling, and frowning and saying, is that right? I could feel her listening with all her heart, and it felt good. You know what? She said, when I was all done. What? Could be you got more of your mama in you than just your red hair and freckles and running fast. Really? I said. Like what? Like what? Like maybe you got her green thumb. The two of us can plant something and see how it grows. Test your thumb out. When someone says you have a green thumb, that's an idiom for you're a good gardener or you like gardening. Okay, I said. What Gloria Dump picked for me to grow was a tree. Or she said it was a tree. To me, it looked like a plant. She had me dig a hole for it and put it in the ground and pat the dirt around it tight, like it was a baby, and I was tucking it into bed. What kind of tree is it? I asked Gloria Dump. It's a wait and see tree, she said. What's that mean? It means you gotta wait for it to grow up before you can see what it is. Can I come back and see it tomorrow? I asked. Child, she said, as long as this is my garden, you're welcome in it. But that tree ain't going to have changed much by tomorrow. But I want to see you too, I said. Said Gloria Dump. I ain't going nowhere. I'll be right here. I woke Winn-Dixie up then. He had peanut butter in his whiskers, and he kept yawning and stretching. He licked Gloria Dump's hand before we left, and I thanked her. That night, when the preacher was tucking me into bed, I told him how I got a job at Gertrude's Pets. And I told him all about making friends with Miss Franny Block and getting invited to Sweetie Pie's party. And I told him about meeting Gloria Dump. Winn-Dixie lay on the floor waiting for the preacher to leave so he could hop up on the bed like he always did. And when I was done talking, the preacher kissed me goodnight, and then he leaned way over to gave Winn-Dixie a kiss too, right on top of his head. You can go ahead and get up there now, he said to Winn-Dixie. And Winn-Dixie looked at the preacher. He didn't smile at him, but he opened his mouth wide like he was laughing. Like the preacher had just told him the funniest joke in the world. And this was what amazed me the most. The preacher laughed back. What does that tell you about the preacher? And how he feels about Winn-Dixie? Winn-Dixie hopped up on the bed, and the preacher got up and turned out the light. I leaned over and kissed Winn-Dixie too, right on the nose, but he didn't notice because he was already asleep and snoring. Chapter 11. That night there was a real bad thunderstorm, but what woke me up wasn't the thunder and lightning, it was Winn-Dixie whining and butting his head up against the bedroom door. Winn-Dixie, I said, what are you doing? He didn't pay any attention to me, he just kept beating his head against the door and whining and whimpering, and when I got out of bed and went over to put my hand on his head, he was shaking and trembling so hard that it scared me. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around him, but he didn't turn or look at me or smile or sneeze or wag his tail or do any normal kind of Winn-Dixie thing. He just kept beating his head against the door and crying and shaking. You want the door open? I said. Huh? Is that what you want? I stood up and opened the door, and Winn-Dixie flew through it like something big and ugly and mean was chasing him. Winn-Dixie, I hissed. Come back here. I didn't want him going and waking up the preacher. But it was too late. Winn-Dixie was already at the other end of the trailer in the preacher's room. I could tell because there was a sproing sound that must have come from Winn-Dixie jumping up on the bed, and then there was a sound from the preacher like he was real surprised. But none of it lasted long, because Winn-Dixie came tearing back out of the preacher's room, panting and running like crazy. I tried to grab him, but he was going too fast. "Opal," said the preacher. He was standing at the door in his bedroom. He was standing at the door to his bedroom, and his hair was kind of all wild on top of his head, and he was looking around like he wasn't sure where he was. "Opal, what's going on?" "I don't know," I told him, but just then there was a huge crack of thunder, one so loud that it shook the whole trailer, and Winn-Dixie came shooting back out of my room and went running right past me, and I screamed, "Daddy, watch out!" But the preacher was still confused. He just stood there, and Winn-Dixie came barreling right toward him like he was a bowling ball, and the preacher was the only pin left standing. And wham! They both fell to the ground. "Uh-oh," I said. "Opal," said the preacher. He was lying on his stomach, and Winn-Dixie was sitting on top of him, panting and whining. "Yes, sir," I said. "Opal," the preacher said again. "Yes, sir," I said a little louder. "Do you know what a pathological fear is?" "No, sir," I told him. The preacher raised a hand. He rubbed his nose. "Well," he said after a minute, "it's a fear that goes beyond normal fears. It's a fear you can't be talked out of or reasoned out of." And just then there was another crack of thunder, and Winn-Dixie rose straight up in the air like somebody had poked him with something hot. And when he hit the floor, he started running. He ran back to my bedroom, and I didn't even try to catch him. I just got out of his way. The preacher lay there on the ground, rubbing his nose. Finally, he sat up. He said, "Opal, I believe Winn-Dixie has a pathological fear of thunderstorms." And just when he finished his sentence, here came Winn-Dixie again, running to save his life. I got the preacher up off the floor and out of the way just in time. There didn't seem to be a thing we could do for Winn-Dixie to make him feel better. So we just sat there and watched him run back and forth, all terrorized and panting. And every time there was another crack of thunder, Winn-Dixie acted all over again like it was surely the end of the world. "The storm won't last long," the preacher told me, "and when it's over, the real Winn-Dixie will come back." And after a while, the storm did end. The rain stopped, and there wasn't any more lightning. And finally, the last rumble of thunder went away, and Winn-Dixie quit running back and forth and came over to where me and the preacher were sitting, cocked his head like he was saying, "What in the world are you two doing out of bed in the middle of the night?" And then he crept up on the couch with us in this funny way he has, where he gets on the couch an inch at a time, kind of sliding himself onto it, looking off in a different direction like it's all happening by accident, like he doesn't intend to get on the couch, but all of a sudden, there he is. And so the three of us sat there. I rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and scratched him behind the ears the way he liked. And the preacher said, "There are an awful lot of thunderstorms in Florida in the summertime." "Yes, sir," I said. I was afraid that maybe he would say we couldn't keep a dog who went crazy with a pathological fear every time there was a crack of thunder. "We'll have to keep an eye on him," the preacher said. He put his arm around Winn-Dixie. "We'll have to make sure he doesn't get out during a storm. He might run away. We have to make sure to keep him safe." "Yes, sir," I said again. And all of a sudden, it was hard for me to talk. I loved the preacher so much. I loved him because he loved Winn-Dixie. I loved him because he was going to forgive Winn-Dixie for being afraid. But most of all, I loved him for putting his arm around Winn-Dixie like that, like he was already trying to keep him safe. Chapter 12. Me and Winn-Dixie got to Gertrude's Pets so early for my first day of work that the close sign was still in the window. But when I pushed on the door, it swung open, and so we went inside. I was about to call out to Otis that we were there, but then I heard music. It was the prettiest music I had ever heard in my life. I looked around to see where it was coming from, and that's when I noticed that all the animals were out of their cages. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes, and they were all just sitting there on the floor like they had turned to stone. And Otis was standing in the middle of them. He was playing a guitar, and he had a skinny, pointy-toed cowboy boots, and he was tapping them while he was playing the music. His eyes were closed, and he was smiling. Winn-Dixie got a dreamy kind of look on his face. He smiled really hard at Otis, and then he sneezed. That's what he does when he's happy. And then his whiskers went all fuzzy. And then he sighed and kind of dropped to the floor with all the other animals. And just then, Gertrude caught sight of Winn-Dixie. "Dog!" she croaked, and flew over and landed on his head. Otis looked up at me. He stopped playing his guitar, and the spell was broken. Playing his guitar... the rabbit started hopping, and the birds started flying, and the lizards started leaping, the snakes started slithering, and Winn-Dixie started barking and chasing everything that was moving, and Otis shouted, "Help me!" And for what seemed like a long time, me and Otis ran around trying to catch mice and gerbils and hamsters and snakes and lizards. We kept on bumping into each other and tripping over the animals, and Gertrude kept screaming, "Dog! Dog!" And every time I caught something, I put it back in the first cage I saw. I didn't care if it was the right cage or not. I just put it in and slammed the door. And the whole time I was chasing things, I was thinking that Otis must be some kind of snake charmer, the way he could play his guitar and make all the animals turn to stone. And then I thought, this is silly. I shouted over to Winn-Dixie, barking it, and Gertrude yelling, and I say, "Play some more music, Otis." So a snake charmer, you've probably seen those. They're kind of like where the guy plays like the clarinet or the instrument and like the snake comes out of the basket. That's what a snake charmer is. He looked at me for a minute, and then he started playing his guitar, and in just a few seconds, everything was quiet. Winn-Dixie was lying on the floor, blinking his eyes and smiling to himself and sneezing every now and then. And the mice and the gerbils and the rabbits and the lizards and the snakes that we hadn't caught yet got quiet and sat still, and I picked them up one by one, and I put them back into their cages. When I was all done, Otis stopped playing. He looked down at his boots. "I was just playing them some music. It makes them happy." "Yes, sir," I said. "Did they escape from their cages?" "No," Otis said. "I'd take them out. I feel sorry for them being locked up all the time. I know what it's like being locked up." "You do?" I said. "I've been to jail," Otis said. He looked at me real quick and then looked back down at his boots. "You have?" I said. "Never mind," said Otis. "Aren't you here to sweep the floor?" "Yes, sir," I told him. He walked over to the counter and started digging through a pile of things, and finally he came up with a broom. "Here," he said, "you should start sweeping." Only he must have gotten confused. He was holding out his guitar to me instead of the broom. "With your guitar?" I asked. He blushed and handed me the broom, and I started to work. I'm a good sweeper. I swept the whole store and then dusted some of the shelves. The whole time I worked, Winn-Dixie followed me, and Gertrude followed him, flying behind him and sitting on his head and his back and croaking real quiet to herself. "Daw, daw." When I was done, Otis thanked me. I left Gertrude's pets thinking about how the preacher probably wouldn't like it very much that I was working for a criminal. Sweetie Pie Thomas was waiting for me right in front. "I see that," she said. She stood there and sucked her knuckle and stared at me. "See what?" I said. "I seen all the animals out of their cages and keeping real still. Is that man magic?" she asked. "Kind of," I told her. She hugged Winn-Dixie around the neck. "Just like this grocery store dog, right?" "Right," I said. I started walking, and Sweetie Pie took her knuckle out of her mouth and put her hand in mine. "Are you coming to my birthday party?" she asked. "I surely am," I told her. "The theme is pink," she said. "I know," I told her. "I gotta go," she said all of a sudden. "I gotta go home and tell my mama about what I seen. I live right down there in that yellow house. That's my mama on the porch. You see her? She's waving at you." I waved at the woman on the porch, and she waved back, and I watched Sweetie Pie run off to tell her mama about Otis being a magic man. It made me think about my mama and how I wanted to tell her the story about Otis charming all the animals. I was collecting stories for her. I would also tell her about Miss Franny and the bear, and about meeting Gloria Dump and believing for just a minute that she was a witch. I had a feeling that these were the kinds of stories my mama would like, the kind that would make her laugh out loud, the way the preacher said she liked to laugh. Chapter 13. Me and Winn-Dixie got into a daily routine. where we would leave the trailer early in the morning and get down to Gertrude's Pets in time to hear Otis play his guitar music for the animals. Sometimes, Sweetie Pie snuck in for the concert too. She sat on the floor and wrapped her arms around Winn-Dixie and rocked him back and forth like he was a big old teddy bear. And then, when the music was over, she would walk around trying to pick out which pet she wanted. But she always gave up and went home, because the only thing she really wanted was a dog like Winn-Dixie. And after she was gone, I would sleep and clean up and even arrange some of Otis's shelves, because he did not have an eye for arranging things, and I did. And when I was done, Otis would write down my time in a notebook that he had marked on the outside. 1 red leather collar, 1 red leather leash. And the whole time, he did not in any way ever act like a criminal. After working on Gertrude's Pets, me and Winn-Dixie would go over to Herman W. Block Memorial Library and talk to Miss Franny Block and listen to her tell us a story. But my favorite place to be that summer was in Gloria Dump's yard. And I figured it was Winn-Dixie's favorite place too, because when we got up to the last block before her house, Winn-Dixie would break away from my bike and start to run for all he was worth, heading for Gloria Dump's backyard and his spoonful of peanut butter. Sometimes Dunlop and Stevie Dewberry would follow me. They would holler, "There goes the preacher's daughter, visiting the witch." "She's not a witch," I told them. It made me mad the way that they wouldn't listen to me and kept on believing whatever they wanted to believe about Gloria Dump. One time, Stevie said to me, "My mama says you shouldn't be spending all your time cooped up in that pet shop and at the library, sitting around talking with old ladies. She says you should get out in the fresh air and play with kids your age. That's what my mama says." "Oh, lay off of her, Dunlop," said to Stevie. Then he turned to me. "He don't mean it," he said. But I was already mad. I shouted at Stevie. I said, "I don't care what your mama says. She's not my mama, so she can't tell me what to do." "I'm going to tell your mama you said that." "I'm going to tell my mama you said that," shouted Stevie. "And she'll tell your daddy, and she'll shame you in front of the whole, and he'll shame you in front of the whole church. And the pet shop man is retarded, and he was in jail, and I wonder if your daddy knows that." So, real quick, we're learning a little bit about Stevie and Dunlop Dewberry. Not the nicest boys. And they're kind of picking on her for hanging out with Gloria Dump. We all know that one word, the R word, and the pet shop man is retarded and he was in jail. We know that word is not a nice word and we don't really use it anymore. But these characters are not the nicest characters. "Otis is not retarded," I said, "and my daddy knows that he was in jail." And that was a lie. But I didn't care. "And you can go ahead and tell on me if you want, you big bald-headed baby." I swear, it about wore me out yelling at Dunlop and Stevie Dewberry every day. But the time I got to Gloria Dump's yard, I felt like a soldier who had been fighting a hard battle. Gloria would make me a peanut butter sandwich, Gloria would make me a peanut butter sandwich straight off, and then she would pour me a cup of coffee with half coffee and half milk, and that would refresh me. "Why don't you play with them boys?" Gloria asked me. "Because they're ignorant," I told her. "They still think you're a witch. It doesn't matter how many times I told them you're not." See if you can figure out what the word ignorant means. "Because they're ignorant," I told her. "They still think you're a witch. It doesn't matter how many times I tell them you're not. So if someone's ignorant, it means that they don't learn or they don't listen to facts around them. So even though she tells the boys that Gloria Dump's not a witch, they don't believe her. And that's ignorant. So ignorant's not really a great thing. "I think they are just trying to make friends with you in a roundabout way," Gloria Dump said. "I don't want to be their friend," I said. It might be fun having them two boys as friends." "I'd rather talk to you," I said. "They're stupid and mean and they're boys." Gloria would shake her head and sigh, and then she would ask me what was going on in the world and did I have any stories to tell her. And I always did. Chapter 14. Sometimes I told Gloria the story Miss Franny Block had just told me. or I imitated Otis tapping his pointy-toed shoes and playing for all the animals, and that always made her laugh. And sometimes I made up a story, and Gloria Dump would listen to it all the way through from beginning to end. She told me she used to love to read stories, but she couldn't anymore because her eyes were so bad. "Can't you get some really strong glasses?" I asked her. "Child," she said, "they don't make glasses strong enough for these eyes." And one day, when the storytelling was done, I decided to tell Gloria that Otis was a criminal. I thought maybe I should tell an adult about it, and Gloria was the best adult I knew. "Gloria," I said. "Mm-hmm," she said back. You know Otis?" "I don't know him, but I know what you tell me about him." "Well, he's a criminal, and he's been to jail. Do you think I should be afraid of him?" "What for?" "I don't know, for doing bad things, I guess, for being in jail." "Child," said Gloria, "let me show you something." She got up out of her chair real slow and took hold of my arm. "Let's the two of us walk all the way to the back of this yard." "Okay," I said. We walked, and Winn-Dixie followed right behind us. It was a huge yard, and I'd never been all the way back in it. And when we got to the big old tree, we stopped. "Look at this tree," Gloria said. I looked up. There were bottles hanging from just about every branch. They were whiskey bottles and beer bottles and wine bottles, all tied on with a string, and some of them were clanking against each other and making a spooky kind of noise. Me and Winn-Dixie stood and stared at the tree, and the hair on top of his head rose up a little bit, and he growled deep in his throat. Gloria Dump pointed her cane at the tree. "What do you think about this tree?" I said, "I don't know. Why are all those bottles in it?" "To keep the ghosts away," Gloria said. "What ghosts?" "The ghosts of all the things I've done wrong." I looked at the bottles in the tree. "You did that many things wrong?" I asked her. "Mm-hmm," said Gloria. "More than just that." "But you're the nicest person I know," I told her. "Don't mean I haven't done bad things," she said. There's whiskey bottles on there," I told her, "and beer bottles." "Child," said Gloria Dump, "I know that. I'm the one who put them there. I'm the one who drank what was in them." "My mama drank," I whispered. "I know it," Gloria Dump said. "The preacher said that sometimes she couldn't stop drinking." "Mm-hmm," said Gloria again. "That's the way it is for some folks. We get started and we just can't get stopped." "Are you one of those people?" "Yes, ma'am, I am. But these days I don't drink nothing stronger than coffee." "Did the whiskey and the beer and the wine, did they make you do the bad things that are ghosts now?" "Some of them," said Gloria Dump. "Some of them I would have done anyway, with alcohol or without, before I learned." "Learned what?" Learned what is the most important. Before I learned. Learned what? Learned what is the most important thing. "What's that?" I asked her. "It's different for everyone," she said. "You find out on your own, but in the meantime, you got to remember you can't always judge people by the things they've done." That sounds like a theme. You can't always judge people by the things they've done. Kind of sounds like that theme that we put on our anchor chart. Don't judge a book by its cover. There it is, right in the book, the theme. Let's track that theme and see if it continues through the whole story, the whole rest of the book. Can't judge people by the way they look. You got to judge them by what they are doing now. You judge Otis by his pretty music that he plays and how kind he is to other animals, because that's all you know about him right now. All right? "Yes, ma'am," I said. "And them Dewberry boys, you try not to judge them too harsh either, all right?" "All right," I said. "All right, then," said Gloria Dump, and she turned and started walking away. Winn-Dixie nudged me with his wet nose and wagged his tail. And when he saw I wasn't going, he trotted after Gloria. I stayed where I was and studied the tree. I wondered if my mama, wherever she was, had a tree full of bottles, and I wondered if I was a ghost to her, the same way she sometimes seemed like a ghost to me. Okay, one more quick chapter. Chapter 15. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library's air conditioning unit didn't work very well. And there was only one fan, and from the minute me and Winn-Dixie got in the library, he hogged it all. He lay right in front of it and wagged his tail and let it blow his fur all around. And some of his fur was pretty loose and blew right off of him like a dandelion puff. I worried about him hogging the fan, and I worried about the fan blowing him bald. But Miss Franny said not to worry about either thing, that Winn-Dixie could hog the fan if he wanted, and she had never in her life seen a dog made bald by a fan. Sometimes when Miss Franny was telling a story, she would have a fit. There were small fits. They were small fits, and they didn't last long. But what happened was she would forget what she was saying. She would just stop and start to shake like a little leaf. And when that happened, Winn-Dixie would get up from the fan and sit right at Miss Franny Block's side. He would sit up tall, protecting her, with her ears standing up straight on his head like soldiers. And when Miss Franny stopped shaking and started talking again, Winn-Dixie would lick her hand and lie back down in front of the fan. So when it says she would have a fit, like when someone has a fit, that can have different meanings. Like sometimes teachers or parents have fits. That's like they're angry. But in this case, it doesn't mean Miss Franny's angry. She's having a fit. It just means that she's having like an episode, like a little thing that starts and then stops. So she's shaking. We might have to read to find out more about that, but you might be making some predictions about why she shakes. And why, when she shakes, she only shakes a little bit and then stops. Remember, Miss Franny Block is older. Something to think about. Whenever Miss Franny had one of her fits, it reminded me of Winn-Dixie in a thunderstorm. There were a lot of thunderstorms that summer, and I got real good at holding on Winn-Dixie whenever they came. I held on to him and comforted him and whispered to him and rocked him just the same way he tried to comfort Miss Franny when she had her fits. Only I held on to Winn-Dixie for another reason, too. I held on to him tight so he wouldn't run away. It all made me think about Gloria Dump. I wondered who comforted her when she heard those bottles knocking together, those ghosts chattering about the things she had done wrong. I wanted to comfort Gloria Dump, and I decided that the best way to do that would be to read her a book. Read it to her loud enough to keep the ghosts away. And so I asked Miss Franny. I said, Miss Franny, I've got a grown-up friend whose eyes are going on her, and I would like to read her a book out loud. Do you have any suggestions? Suggestions, Miss Franny said. Yes, ma'am, I have suggestions. Of course I have suggestions. How about Gone with the Wind? What's that about, I asked her. Why, said Miss Franny, it's a wonderful story about the Civil War. The Civil War, I said. Do not tell me you've never heard of the Civil War. Miss Franny Block looked like she was going to faint. She waved her hands in front of her face. I know about the Civil War, I told her. That was the war between the South and the North over slavery. So the Civil War was a war that America fought, America kind of against itself. The north part of the United States and the southern part of the United States fought against whether slaves were okay or slaves were not okay. The North won, and that's why slavery ended. Slavery, yes, said Miss Franny. It was also about states' rights and money. It was a terrible war. My grandfather fought in that war, and he was just a boy. Your great-grandfather? Yes, ma'am. Litmus W. Block. Now there's a story. Winn-Dixie yawned real big, and lay down on his side with a thump and a sigh. I swear he knew the phrase, now there's a story. And he knew it meant we weren't going anywhere soon. Go ahead and tell me, Miss Franny, I said. I sat down crisscrossed-legged next to Winn-Dixie. I pushed him and tried to get him to share the fan, but he pretended he was asleep, and he wouldn't move. I was all settled in and ready for a good story when the door banged and pinched-faced Amanda Wilkinson came in. Winn-Dixie sat up and stared at her. He tried out a smile on her, but she didn't smile back, and so he lay down again. I'm ready for another book. Amanda said, slamming her book down on Miss Franny's desk. Well, said Miss Franny, maybe you wouldn't mind waiting. I'm telling India Opal a story about my great-grandfather. You are, of course, welcome to listen. It will just be a minute. Amanda sighed a real big dramatic sigh. And stared past me. She pretended like she wasn't interested. But she was, I can tell. Come sit over here, said Miss Franny. I'll stand, thank you, said Amanda. Suit yourself, said Miss Franny. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, Litmus. Litmus W. Block. And that's where we'll stop. What a cliffhanger. That's not fair. All right, till next time.